She had stuck post-its with affirmations around her house. And one of them was, "I must purge myself of my reptilian DNA."
This is the Q Dropped podcast. Stories of relationships torn apart by QAnon. It wasn't so long ago when it felt like we could maintain friendships with people who were on the opposite side of the political spectrum. I had this friend in my late 20s, Scott. He was a conservative man, but we always found ourselves in the same circle of people, at the same bars, and at the same parties. Scott and I would often end up deep in discussion about topical issues of the day. We obviously didn't see things the same way and would butt heads on many issues like abortion, taxes, social safety nets, and more. We'd be a few drinks in and things could get loud, but we genuinely considered what each other was saying. And by the end of it all, we always remained friends. This is the dream, according to many conservative voices today. To be able to have a differing political opinion from someone you care about and still maintain that relationship. I've even heard it from my parents when we first found out they were subscribing to the QAnon worldview. "I guess we're just not allowed to have a differing opinion," they would complain. Conservative thinkers on Twitter can be seen making the same complaint. Just yesterday, a Q-Dropped listener sent me a tweet thread of MAGA cultists complaining about being disowned by their left-leaning loved ones, and every second response was, "I guess we just aren't allowed to think differently anymore." I can put the link to that thread in the show notes if you care to choke back disgust. But the point is, many people seem to think this is still just a matter of differing opinions. So in this episode, we're going to hear from Lisa, whose friend crossed lines that can't be uncrossed. And hopefully, by the end of it, we'll all understand why it's not just a difference of opinion. It is indeed a difference of morality. A quick trigger warning. We mentioned drug use and the murders of minors in this episode. You'll also notice that there are third-party ads as well. Our patrons enjoy ad-free episodes, so sign up at the link in the show notes. We've also put together a special holiday gift for our patrons, a patron-only episode featuring a husband whose wife has gone down the rabbit hole. We hope you enjoy it at the link in our show notes. Also, this is the last episode of the year for us, but we will be back with fresh new interviews and all kinds of extras in the new year. More details on that at the end of this episode. Back when I would debate Scott at parties, even though we'd often had a few too many drinks, we always started in the same reality. I had the ability to provide Scott with evidence which he would then consider, and there were many sources of evidence we could trust. Scientific consensus, for example, was a concept both he and I accepted as a route to the truth. In other words, we had a shared reality, which is clearly something that we collectively as humans no longer have. When you do not live in the same reality as someone else, and when they don't trust the laws of physics, the laws of biology, or geography, when they deny that 2 + 2 = 4 and instead insist that 2 + 2 = 4 is a lie planted in the vulnerable minds of sheep by forces that do not exist, there is nowhere to go from there. You can't speak to someone living in that world and hope to get anywhere. The further you stretch to try and reach them, the more distance is created. You cannot explain to someone like that 2 + 2 does in fact equal 4, because any evidence you attempt to provide is dismissed as either a product of your own brainwashing, your inability to see the truth, or the fact that you yourself are a paid shill for the deep state. What a Q describes as a difference of opinion is more aptly described as a difference in morality. QAnon adherents refuse to make the simplest accommodations to help overcome a worldwide pandemic. Anti-vaxxers are responsible for the sudden reappearance of diseases we haven't seen in decades. The result is the actual death of millions of people. At one point in time, the USA was reporting thousands of deaths per day from COVID during the height of the anti-mask and anti-vaccine rhetoric. When you refuse to wear a mask or vaccinate, this isn't just a difference of opinion. It's a matter of life and death. During the course of this podcast, we've heard from a man whose son refused to stop bringing his loaded gun to family gatherings where 13 kids were running around. We've heard from a transgender man whose mother freely posted transphobic content to her Facebook page in full view of her children. We've spoken to a man on the autism spectrum who has been enduring ableism from his QAnon mother in his own home. We heard from Flo, whose parents up and sold the family home and moved to Costa Rica from Germany without a word. We've heard about a survivor of one of America's most horrific school shootings, having to listen to his father accuse him of being a crisis actor. There was a white husband who began saying racist things to his black wife. And then we heard from Jane, whose own white mother sent her racist videos, despite the fact that she and all her siblings were half black. Understand that these things are not just differing opinions. These things are straight up abuse. Storming the Capitol, driving the fear of death into the occupants, and causing the real deaths of 5 people is not a different opinion. Stripping women of the potentially life-saving decision to terminate a pregnancy is not a different opinion. When Texas begins compiling names of transgender people in the state, it's not a differing opinion. These people have crossed lines that cannot be uncrossed. These are game-changing actions, relationship-threatening behaviors. The MAGA cultists actually expect that you should continue to tolerate someone who doesn't think you deserve the same rights they do. They think they're being oppressed if you refuse to be in their presence when they haven't been wearing masks. They want you to maintain a relationship with them as they point at you and call you broken over and over. They'll send a person of color clearly racist content, and when you object, they'll complain that they can't just have a difference of opinion anymore. No, the Qs in our lives haven't just pushed the boundaries of what any normal person should have to put up with. They've destroyed those boundaries repeatedly and relentlessly. This is no longer friendly banter over a brew at a party. This is no longer 2 people with different worldviews. When you're trying to strip people of their basic human rights, including the right to live, you don't just have a differing opinion. That's like saying Jeffrey Dahmer and I just had a simple difference in food preferences. While there are plenty of conservative people out there with whom I do have a mere difference of opinion, my friend Scott included, the Q adherents are not that. They have been drawn into something nonsensical and far more sinister, something that has already resulted in the deaths of millions of people and will continue to result in the deaths of millions more. No, this isn't a different worldview. It's not just another opinion. It is, in no uncertain terms, a death cult that has robbed us of a shared reality and therefore the ability to discuss it. Scott didn't want to take my rights away. Scott didn't want to take anyone's rights away. And when you sat down to show him how, perhaps, some of the policies he supported could potentially do that, he would change his mind. With today's loudest conservatives, however, There is no sitting down to explain. That requires a basic foundation of common reality on which to start. It doesn't matter how close you are to your QAnon friend, once that foundation of common reality is crumbled, there is simply nowhere to rebuild. Today's story, featuring Lisa, who is in the Netherlands, is about two friends once inseparable, who suddenly find themselves in two very different realities.
So I grew up in the southwest of Germany.
Lisa is a 24-year-old university student writing her thesis.
I come from like a middle-class background. I'm an only child, so I think I had a fairly regular upbringing. I've always traveled a lot. So after high school, I did the very typical thing of going on a 6-month trip abroad. Yeah, and then I came back and I didn't really want to stay in Germany. So I decided that the Netherlands seemed quite interesting. And now I feel like I'm going to settle down here. The Netherlands have just made their way into my heart.
Unlike all of our previous episodes, Lisa's story is not about family. In fact, it sounds like she has a pretty amazing and supportive family. Today, we're going to venture into the tale of a close friendship lost to the QAnon phenomenon. Lisa tells us about her best friend.
So we met when we entered 5th grade, when we were 10 years old. And I think we became friends pretty quickly. I mean, we graduated together. We had a lot of our youth was shared. Like when we had our first prom, I think we danced with each other more than we did with any of the boys. I don't know, we just always talked about everything, but we really brought out a fun side in each other. I think that's something that was quite unique to us as friends, that we really got ourselves out of our comfort zones. And it was usually a good time, but it could also be a very sincere time when it needed to be. She is the closest friend I ever had.
I asked Lisa what made this friendship so special.
I think it's really the small things. It's sort of, the evenings that we stayed up until 3 a.m. just talking, or, playing, going thrifting and playing dress up, just goofing around. And so for a while I lived in the Netherlands and she didn't. And I think in our friendship, funnily enough, that was the peak of it in a sense, because she always came to visit me for 3, 4, 5 days. And we would have a blast and we would concentrate all of that friendship into those long weekends. And then I came back to Germany to see friends and family. And of course we saw each other. But it was those short and intense bursts. That was incredible.
Before long, the pair found that they were much happier when they were together.
And then in the end of it, she decided, I'm looking for a place to study. And she actually moved here a year after me.
Lisa's best friend became a constant fixture in her life once again.
I mean, she lived 10 minutes cycling from me. So that is pretty close. I was quite happy in the beginning, especially since my first year had been a bit lonely, moving to a new country at 18. And of course you make friends. Of course there's so many international students here, but it's still quite a step to take and it takes some time to adjust. And then suddenly I found out that my best friend, who I've had so many amazing times with, was going to live a short cycle away. Of course I was happy.
The way Lisa explains it, it sounds like these were some of the best days of her life.
We both suddenly lived in a country where weed was legal. So it was a lot of smoking and chilling and just hanging out on the balcony and talking. But we traveled within the Netherlands quite a bit because we suddenly, we lived in a new country and there was time to explore, and there was an amazing hostel that we went to quite a lot. Whenever we felt like we needed a weekend away, it would be just let's pop down there for a weekend. It's not expensive. It's just hang out, party, meet some people. But it was also I taught her how to cook, for example, because she'd never learned how to cook at home. And I quite liked cooking. So we sort of figured out those adult life skills together.
But during all of this, something was lurking below the surface. Lisa's best friend had begun a sort of spiritual journey before her move to the Netherlands.
I think the summer before she moved to the Netherlands. She went to a psychedelic festival, also in the Netherlands. And she'd been in touch with drugs and psychedelics before, but that's where she got in touch with a shaman. And she considers that to be quite a life-changing experience, which it probably was. So from there, a lot of what's come kind of spiraled. So I think that's sort of when I first started noticing a change, when she decided to experiment with drugs.
But it wasn't a big concern for Lisa. In fact, she would join her friend in her exploration of some of these drugs. Together, they would do mushrooms and other mind-altering substances and have inexplicable experiences only they would ever understand. But for Lisa, it was just a little bit of fun. It would seem that for Lisa's friend, it was something else entirely.
I mean, I think she was on that path. She was sort of rejecting normality in the mainstream. And so she was looking for alternative answers, which she found there. In the beginning, I actually supported it, and I supported her. But the things that I noticed were she started questioning things that I think are quite normal to question, like government authority over legalization, that sort of thing. I think that's, perfectly reasonable things to discuss about. Then from that came sort of the idea that, oh, this has helped me so much. I must transform my new space, my new home into a sanctuary for people to experience these things. But there's a difference between benefiting from experiences and furnishing your entire house to be a good and safe place to do psychedelics in.
That was when Lisa noticed something in her friend's home that completely threw her off.
She had stuck Post-its with affirmations around her house. And one of them was, I must purge myself of my reptilian DNA.
How did you deal with that?
I mean, I asked her about it. And then she replied with such certainty that to me, it sounded like there was no point in discussing the matter. Because she did not reply as if this was a presumption or if this was like to her, this was fact. And I just left her be, and I figured it was one of her quirks.
Unfortunately, this wasn't just a quirk. In August of 2021, Matthew Coleman snapped and killed his 2 children. Coleman had been a very successful surf school owner in Southern California. He was married to the love of his life, and as a committed Christian, seemed to be living the dream. You can even find videos of him online beaming with his wife and kids on a beach. The investigation into their deaths would reveal that the couple had been deep diving into QAnon conspiracy theories online. He became convinced that his wife had passed on reptilian DNA to his 2 children. He felt that his reptilian children posed a threat to everyone, literally calling them monsters, and that killing them was his obligation as it would save the world. He drove them to Mexico and stabbed them to death, leaving their lifeless bodies by the side of the road. They were 2 years and 10 months old. We want to laugh when we hear that someone believes in lizard people. It's so far-fetched, so way out there, it's wild and bizarre and comical. At one point in time, it was just a silly conspiracy theory that no one really believed. It's an old conspiracy theory that gained a lot of attention back when I was a teenager, with the wildly popular conspiracy theories written by David Icke. I recall hanging out with a close friend of mine discussing his books and theories myself. But it was always tongue-in-cheek. It was always a what-if conversation and never a for-sure conversation. David Icke proposed that reptilians walked the earth in human suits and took positions of power to eventually completely take over our world. It's crazy to think that anyone would actually believe this. But Matthew Coleman certainly did, and now Lisa's best friend in the world was a true believer too. But Lisa didn't know any of this. Lisa only knew she loved her best friend and was having the time of her life exploring a whole new country with her. That is, until the pandemic hit.
So the big push of conspiracy theories from her came with COVID. So in the beginning, I remember like she got a really cute mask with like little dinosaurs on it, and she was really excited about it. So that was in the very beginning, and she was wearing it. And then it sort of shifted, and she started saying like, oh, you can't even see people. Like, why is this so stupid? Sheep, blah, blah, blah. But I think in the very beginning, I remember her being excited about having a cute mask.
That's when parts of Europe went into strict lockdowns.
So I think at first it was quite solitary for her, and she sort of started viewing it as like a time for meditation and reflection, which I think is quite a good way of approaching it. I think she started out thinking, and she actually documented this on her YouTube channel, that this was sort of like a reset for humans to sort of settle down again and like nature to recover a bit, and we're going to be done in a month. And I think then she was fine with it. But when it kept on dragging, she started feeling like it was like the government was doing this to impose themselves up on people. And she started posting things online of like, this is basically being done to exert control, and don't believe everything they say. They want you to panic. Those were the early ones. And then as things progressed and the anti-COVID movement grew bigger, she started posting things. And so you must see this in the context of us being German. And she posted things in German that were overtly comparing the COVID rules at the time to Nazi times. And specifically, I know this is a faux pas everywhere, but I think that as Germans, we're a lot more like susceptible to these things. So that's when I really started to get worried.
Like every other QAnon adherent that we've heard about, it wasn't enough for Lisa's friend to believe her theories. She needed to convince others to believe them too.
At one point during early COVID, she sent me a video from an Italian populist titled, "The Italian government speaks the truth," which of course was not the government. It was some member of parliament from the populist party who happened to have the microphone. And of course, that was quite easily disproved. And I told her that. And then she sort of shrugged it off and smiled and said, do your own research. Basically, it was when Italy went into heavy lockdown. And it was basically just, oh, this is a flu, and why would you let yourself be in prison, blah, blah, blah. It was kind of the typical narrative of, why do you bother with this? This is nothing.
Her friend's attempts to recruit new believers didn't stop at Lisa either.
So she had 2 Telegram channels, which was the main conspiracy platform in Europe. One of which was The Truth About Corona. The other one was What is Happening to Our Children. And on these 2 channels, I mean, she had the link in her Instagram bio. She was actively taking English material and translating it for people who don't speak German. She made channels for whatever she believes in now, on YouTube and Instagram, where she does a lot of, she calls it light language, but she also talks about reptilian DNA.
What is light language?
It's sort of like speaking in tongues. So she believes she's channeling light codes from the universe or something.
Light language is different depending on who is giving you the definition, as is often the case with these wishy-washy, woo-woo things that Q thinkers propose. But I did try to find a working definition for you, so here goes. According to Rachel from a website called Pure Generators, light language is a form of communication that bypasses human limitations around the meaning of words. As opposed to a language made up of symbols and sounds that we have mutually agreed upon as a society or culture, light language has no fixed alphabet. It is a vibrational expression that speaks directly to our soul and DNA. The purpose of light language is to shift our energy to a higher frequency than we usually inhabit. It helps our brains enter the receptivity of the gamma state, which connects multiple areas of our brain. Gamma waves are associated with increased memory recall, sensory perception, focus, processing speed, and creativity. At the soul level, light language can help us heal emotionally and physically, connected to our innate wisdom, activate dormant gifts and truths, and connect to our purpose. So yeah, there's that. Honestly, I am still at a complete loss as to what light language is, because that was just a whole lot of words that said sweet, fancy, bupkis. But I tried, okay? I tried. For Lisa, however, this was just all getting to be a little bit too much.
So I think my first reaction was just to kind of lessen my contact to her, partially also because this was mid-COVID. I knew she was not being very careful, and I was not interested in getting it. So I will say that at that point, our friendship had already taken some pretty severe hits, because I could not talk to her about anything without it either being made into a spiritual problem or some mild, I don't want to call it a maybe some mild government conspiracy. So basically every conversation in one way or another looped around to her beliefs. So at that point, I had already distanced myself from her quite a bit.
I was curious if Lisa's friend had ever talked about Donald Trump.
So before this whole thing, she was quite apolitical. So before that, we didn't talk about politics much, and that didn't change necessarily. The only proper mention of him I remember is actually when the insurrection happened. Then he was all over her Instagram stories. And she was drawing comparisons. Oh, when we did this protest that I went to, we were this far from our parliament building. But look how, look, even letting them in now.
The two friends were seeing less and less of each other, and not just because of lockdowns. But none of that stopped Lisa's friend from crossing the line.
She pushed one boundary quite hard, which was she said to me, oh, I'm going to introduce you to my spiritual healer boyfriend, which she did by sort of pulling me into a session with him without telling me before. At least she didn't charge me for it. But I got there. I was like, okay, I could use a friend right now. And I got sat down on the couch and therapized. I think I just walked out of there and went, what the fuck was that? I think I needed some time to process it. But that was also at a time when our friendship had already greatly deteriorated. I was angry, but I don't think I was too surprised.
That would have been it for me. That would have been the end of the line for our friendship. If you corner me in an apartment alone with your creepy boyfriend and he begins to attempt to give me any kind of therapy, two things are going to happen. Your boyfriend is going to hear some choice words before I leave, and our friendship will be irreparably destroyed. For Lisa, this was just about the last straw. Her friendship was not long for this world.
So for me, there was sort of a changing point when she went 8 hours by bus to Berlin to go to a protest with 1 million people, which was attended by anyone from spiritual people like her to neo-Nazis to people from the group we recently spoke about the 25 people getting arrested for planning a coup. So there was members of that group present. And that for me was the point when I had to confront her. So she was still in Berlin at the time. And I had seen her Instagram stories filled with material from the protests and speeches from members of the AfD, our populist party. And then I texted her and I told her that I don't approve of her going to protests with Nazis and making these comparisons. And then she replied to me that she did not see any Nazis there. And then I went through her footage and I found posters that were pointing in a bit of a different direction. And then we got into a bit of an ideological discussion about whether saying that Germany is still an occupied state and that the Federal Republic of Germany as it is does not exist because it was not like that. We don't have a constitution. It's a whole thing. So that's the remnants of the Second World War and how Germany as it is was formed also with the fall of the wall. But there's sort of a significant group within the far right in Germany that denies that Germany is actually a state and claim themselves to be citizens of a pre-war Germany. And I found these posters, and she sort of shrugged it off. She sort of said that, that the contracts that existed were questionable and doesn't mean that they're Nazis if they deny the existence of current Germany, which is a point that whether they're Nazis or not, they are definitely part of a radical group, of a radical far-right group that I personally think that you should abstain from associating yourself with them. Sort of a lot of talking around the issue. And then what she hit me with at the end of that conversation was sending me the link to her Telegram group and saying that she can help me overcome my cognitive dissonance. I was really upset about it. Of course I was.
Growing up in Canada, we learned all about the Second World War, the rise of Hitler, and the Holocaust. I think most people in the developed world grow up with a deep understanding of just how horrific the Nazi Party was in Germany. I can't imagine what it would have been like to grow up in Germany, learning about that as a student. I can only guess at how significant of a sore spot that must have been for the German people, like a wound that's still healing. And when you see your best friend in the whole world proudly sharing space with neo-Nazis in the streets of Germany, it must feel like that wound has been torn open all over again. I can only begin to understand how painful that must be. I would certainly have kept my distance from her too.
So we've occasionally spoken afterwards. We've seen each other maybe 2 or 3 times. Not since she went to Bali, but it sort of felt like we were both awfully careful about what we were saying because we didn't want to make the situation worse than it was. But I can't look at her the same way anymore. Like I can't. She said to me once that the person she was before she had her awakening was dead. She basically told me that my friend was dead. I mean, it was a difficult time, and I think it was probably more difficult than some breakups I've had.
Today, Lisa doesn't see her friend anymore at all, except on social media.
With her social media that she still keeps. I mean, that is obviously when she turns it up as well, the spiritual conspiracy person she's become. But then watching her, like, laughing, sort of dazed in videos, like, really having once known that person, but not recognizing anything that's coming out of her mouth or that's going on in her face, that is strange. To be honest with you, I'm quite glad that who she became is no longer in my life. I was always the closest person she had from high school. So whenever I went home for, like, to see my friends from high school or to see my parents, every time I showed up, I would be the person that gets asked, what the fuck is going on with her? I've just seen what she posted now. There's a lot of people that have cut ties with her. I actually don't know anyone that's still in touch with her.
Her friend has since moved away from the Netherlands.
Shortly before the last time I saw her, she met someone about twice her age. And I think she met him in England, and he was some sort of a spiritual healer. I read his website. He was talking about treating cancer. So that was also suspicious. And I think I met him once. And yeah, I think the plan was to go to Bali over the winter because it does get cold and gnarly here. And from what I've seen, she hasn't come back yet. And she has adopted a cat, which I'm actually really happy about. She always wanted one. But now I haven't spoken to her last I heard from her, we exchanged Christmas messages last year.
What do you miss the most about her?
I think just how carefree I could be around her. Like, if I think back to the good days, we would laugh so hard we would cry. And I didn't need to be ashamed of anything around her. So, yeah, I think that's sort of what I miss. And I have my partner, who I love dearly, and with whom I laugh and who makes me laugh, and with whom I don't hold shame, but it's different. I have great friends around here, but it's different kinds of friendship. You can't rush 10 years of friendship.
I asked Lisa what she thought her friend was getting out of all of this.
So I think what she was looking for was freedom. So she started out on a journey of, wanting to explore her freedom of taking substances. And that continued into a journey of wanting to explore, I don't know, spirituality, freedom of thought. And then her freedom got taken away. And then she got locked at home. And she suddenly felt like she couldn't do all those things that she normally does. Travel through Europe, go to festivals, go to raves, that sort of thing. That was all taken away from her. And then she was left with way too much time to think about whose fault it is. I think the problem is that she, before the pandemic, surrounded herself with so many people who are in some way or other susceptible to conspiracy and to alternative beliefs, that when the pandemic hit, there was quite a lot of things happening. I mean, there's quite a lot of circular reasoning going on, that all these people that already had some type of this thought were suddenly exposed to so much theory about why this was happening. And there was so much conspiracy theory floating around. And it was such an extraordinary situation that it just set it all ablaze, I think. And she was already surrounding herself quite purposefully with people who were on the edge of these beliefs.
Lisa worries about what QAnon and Q-adjacent ideas mean for the world as a whole.
One thing I'm quite worried about is that a lot of marginal groups that weren't necessarily dangerous or connected got connected, specifically during COVID, through these protests and through these conspiracy theories. And I think that can be a dangerous blend. I think it can just result in more mass radicalization and more people being prone to violence simply because they feel like they have a larger backing in society. Also, I mean, the rise of the far right, of populism throughout the world, really. And I mean, I think it's also shown the power of what you can do with a disinformation campaign.
Lisa has found a few new habits that help her cope.
I've distanced myself from anything spiritual or from anything conspiracy theory. Recently, someone said to me at a party that COVID was just a flu, and I flipped. I also have long COVID, so that doesn't help. And so I got COVID in the summer, and I have a mild, it's technically a long COVID because it's been over 3 months, but I know people who've had it for years. But to me, it means that my condition, condition? Basically my ability to do cardio. So my condition has lessened quite a lot. At the moment, I ride an e-bike because I can't really cycle normally. And this is the Netherlands, so cycling is the main mode of transportation. And big noisy things, I went to IKEA and that tired me out for 2 or 3 days. But I'm slowly rebuilding, and I'm quite lucky that for me, I don't have that many cognitive symptoms. It's mainly physical. But that's been a challenge. I'm in my mid-20s and suddenly I can't walk up the stairs. And then someone at a party tells you COVID is a flu and they don't want to get the next booster. Yeah. I'm writing my thesis right now. So I'm quite glad that brain fog did not hit me, but at least not hit me hard. Sometimes I get brain fog if I physically tire myself out too much. So I don't cycle to uni. I take the bus. So you have to make these kinds of accommodations. But again, my long COVID is fairly mild. the other girl I know that has it, who's had it for over a year, she, she's in her 20s. She was reasonably like fit and healthy. And now she's been, she's kind of trying to finish her master's, but that's not working very well. So now we go swimming together every week to rebuild condition.
Lisa's support system is strong. Her partner has provided a lot of strength for her, as well as her family.
What really helped was that everybody supported me. Like my family, my parents were very proud of me for speaking up to someone I am that close to. So that really helped. But of course, like, there's no going back from that.
When I asked Lisa what advice she might have for other people who are trying to cope with the Q in their lives, her answer was passionate.
I think if you still have the chance to, try to intervene early, because this can get dangerous quickly. And protect yourself. I know it's difficult and I know you love them, but it's not your duty to save everyone. You can't save everyone. So if maintaining that relationship makes you miserable, then question in how far you are willing to maintain it. But I think it's important to be conscious of what's best for yourself as well. It's very easy to become selfless in these situations, which isn't always a good thing.
As for her friend, Lisa doesn't feel there's much hope for her, but she can't bring herself to lose hope altogether.
I mean, she's young, so like she's 24 like me. She's 2 weeks older than me, and I think hope hasn't left me, but I think it would be a major life change, and it would need a lot of admitting things to yourself, or to herself really. So I haven't lost hope about it. I don't know how likely it is. I mean, first of all, she quit her studies. So even if she comes to her senses, there's not a lot to come back to. Also, there's obviously a trail of her on the internet looking like an insane person talking about lizard DNA, which I think can mess up your life. So that worries me. So I think she would have to clear up a lot of messes. She would have to get an education if she actually wanted to get a normal life again.
If she did kind of come to her senses and admit all of those things to herself, would you welcome her back?
Yes, but it would, like, she would at least have to come to a point where I can hold a reasonable conversation with her without the conversation turning to her beliefs. I think if we could get there, we could work together, but we haven't had that for years. In my opinion, she's taken it to some extremes. Like, this wasn't peripheral, this was her life. And that's what kind of worries me.
So she's still posting a lot of like videos and stuff like that. Does she have a big following?
She doesn't really. I mean, I think she really tried to grow it, but it never grew past like a couple of hundred. And she stopped posting for a while. She might, I hope not, but either she's come to some sort of sense, which would be very nice, or she's in a depressive episode again, which is actually my suspicion. But I don't follow her, but I always check.
Because you still care?
Yeah, I do. I don't want to admit it, but I do.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Many thanks to Lisa for sitting down with me and telling us her story. We wish her all the best. If you want more of the Q Dropped podcast, we've uploaded a patron-only episode to our Patreon featuring a husband whose wife has gone down the Q rabbit hole. You'll also get an ad-free version of this episode and all future episodes. Sign up for that in the link in our show notes. John and I are going to take a break to spend Christmas with our family, so this is the last episode of the year. We will be back with you in January with some fresh new interviews. We're also hoping to have some experts on the show to talk to us about how to talk to your Q, how to cope, and how to know when it's time to draw the line and go no contact. We're hoping to do some of these as well as update shows with previous guests live on YouTube as well. So if you'd like to be notified so you can be in on the chat, be sure to follow our YouTube channel in the show notes. Please have a safe and happy holiday season, and if you find yourself in a room with your Q over the holidays, please put your mental health and your safety first. We can't wait to have you back in the new year. Thanks for listening.